I have a friend who's a mashgiach in the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, a mainstream yeshiva, and he came to Eretz Yisrael as a bacher, and while he was there, a shidduch was read to him of a daughter of a man who owned a moving company. Now, that's an important detail that you have to remember, otherwise you won't get the full impact of the end of the story. He got married to fine Bas Talmid Chacham, and he was in Koilo. Not the moving company, right? Not the daughter of the man who owned the moving company. A chashuv Rav, daughter of a chashuv Rav, and a few years after they were married, they had a Koilo apartment. Their stove had seen better days, and they looked into purchasing a new stove, and they realized, as Americans, the best stove they could get would be from America. They'd have it shipped from America, and it would cost them the least, and it would be the best quality. So they arranged to have it shipped to America, to Eretz Yisrael, and they were all excited when they finally got the letter from Haifa that the stove had arrived. Now they had to get a moving company to move it from Haifa to Yerushalayim, where they lived. So they didn't know any moving companies. They didn't know who to call. And the husband, my friend, remembered that he had once gone out with a girl whose father had a moving company. And he remembered the name of the moving company, figured, why not call them? So they did, and they made the arrangements and hired this moving company to move the stove from Haifa to Yerushalayim. And he said it's going to take about 2 weeks. It's at least a week for the paperwork, a lot of paperwork. Stove coming in to Americans living in Israel, it's very complicated. And then it's probably going to take at least a week till they're going to be able to move it to Yerushalayim. It'll take at least 2 weeks, which is no problem because it was 3 weeks before Pesach, and they were looking forward to having the new stove for Pesach. And his wife said, you know, she's not even going to bother cooking anything chametzik in it. She wanted to clean it, and she'll have a brand new stove to cook for Pesach Kavaltik. So 2 weeks went by, and they were expecting to get a call from the moving company that the stove is on its way and will be delivered shortly. And 1 week goes by and they don't hear from them. And 2 weeks go by and they don't hear from them. And now it's getting very close to Pesach. And they're starting to get concerned because even when the stove gets delivered, they're going to have to hire a plumber to come to the house to install the stove. And it's not very easy to get a plumber to come to the house in Eretz Yisrael. They're very hard to come by. It's not so simple. And now it's getting very close to Pesach, and they're getting nervous. What's with the stove? They didn't hear anything from the company. They hired them, didn't deliver the company. And he said it would be here 2 weeks after they got the letter. He got the notice of the arrival of the stove. They got the letter. They knew it had arrived. And I wondered, how come we haven't heard from the moving company? And the husband, my friend, thought to himself, oh, I see what happened. That man is probably still upset with me that I didn't want to go out with his daughter again. And now he's getting back at me by delaying the stove. And here it is, we're stuck because we need this stove. It's almost Pesach. And we expected it 2 weeks ago. It hasn't even arrived yet. And he's starting to cook inside. And he says, you know what? The first thing tomorrow morning, I'm going to call that moving company and fire him. Is this the way he's treating us? And he was really upset. So the first thing he did when he came back from davening, he goes to the phone, and where's that number? I'm going to call him. No, I'm going to call him myself. His wife said, calm down. You know, don't worry about it. It's not so terrible. What do you mean so terrible? It's 3 days before Pesach. We don't have the stove. He's obviously draining us around here. I don't know what's going on, and I'm going to call him and fire him. Where's the phone number? So she reluctantly gives him the phone number. He goes to dial the phone. There's no dial tone. Well, this goes back about 40 years ago. This took place in Eretz Yisrael. And at that time, it was not unusual for phone service to be out. You wouldn't get a dial tone. So it could take a day or two till the phone would be repaired, but it was a common occurrence not to get a dial tone in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. So he figures he'll try back in an hour. Maybe the phone will be working then. He tries back in an hour, still no dial tone. Well, he's getting frustrated and he wants to make this call. He has to fire this moving company. He's so upset. So he goes across the hall and he asks his friend if he could possibly borrow his phone. His phone's not working. Well, wouldn't you know it? His friend's phone wasn't working either. Well, that's pretty unusual. No phone service in the building. All right, there's something wrong with the phone company. All right, he's going to go down later. He'll use the payphone on the street. And he goes to the payphone on the street, lunchtime, and there's no dial tone on the payphone. Well, at this point, he has to go for his afternoon Seder. He figures after the afternoon Seder, he's going to come back and maybe the phones will be working by then. After his afternoon Seder, he comes home, and who does he see pulling up at the same time? The moving company. They're there with the stove. Well, he's not going to say anything now, and they bring in the stove, and the head of the moving company says, you know, I know it's only 3 days before Pesach, so I figured you probably would have a hard time getting someone to install it, so I'm going to have one of my men install it. No extra charge. No extra charge. He's going to install it. Very nice. So now, the moving company man, after he finishes installing the stove and everything's in, says to my friend, you know, you're probably wondering why you didn't hear from me for 2 weeks. Actually, it was 4 weeks since the stove arrived. So my friend said, well, actually, I was wondering, but I didn't want to ask you, but I am curious. He said, I'll tell you. I got the letter the same time you did, saying that the stove had arrived. But when I started doing the paperwork to arrange for picking it up, they told me that they didn't know where the stove was. It was lost. Now, there was a terrible delay because they couldn't find the stove. Now, I know I had promised that I'd be delivering the stove 2 weeks after the letter arrived, but I couldn't do it because they couldn't find the stove. And the reason I didn't call you is because I figured you wouldn't be too happy to hear that your stove that came from America was lost in Haifa. So I kept working on it until finally they could find it. And I drove up personally today to Haifa and made a special trip because I knew how much you needed that stove before Pesach. But I didn't call you before because I knew you'd be upset to know that they hadn't found you, that they had lost your stove. So that's why I didn't call you, and that's why there was the delay, but I'm glad we got it in before Pesach. My friend said to me, it's not uncommon for phone service to be out in Eretz Israel. And it wasn't uncommon for phone service to be out in an entire building. He said, but for the phone service to be out for the whole neighborhood is very unusual. He says, but obviously, in Shemayim, they wanted to prevent him from making that call that not only would have made him look like a fool, but it would have been a Gila Place Hashem, and it would have been very enormous embarrassment if he called to fire the moving company man after he had gone to such great lengths to put himself out and be moise nefesh to find the stove and to deliver it personally. And he was so grateful that he wasn't able to make that call. Sometimes, Rabbosai, something happens. And in our righteous indignation, we are convinced that an immediate response is called for. But I'm here to tell you tonight that that's not so. That sometimes an immediate response is not called for. And the lesson from the stove story is just that sometimes an immediate response is certainly not called for. And that's the topic of our Vaad for this evening. Now, we don't have to look far to find a makar in Chazal for this. It's right away in the first parak in Pirkei Avos, famous Mishnah, Parak Aleph, Mishnah Yud Zayin. Shimon beno Omer, that's Shimon ben Gamliel. Kol yamai gadalti ben chachamim. All my days I grew up among the chachamim. V'lo matzasi leguf tov el shtika. I never found anything better for a person's body than being quiet, keeping your mouth shut. Now, in preparing for the Vaad this evening, I was looking through some Meforshim on Pirkei Avos, and I don't remember which Meforsh it was. It said, why does the Mishnah, why does he use the Lashon, Kol Yamai Gadalti ben HaChachamim? I grew up among the Chachamim. Why does it say, Kol Yamai Lamadati me Chachamim? I learned from the Chachamim. It wasn't Gadalti, I grew up among Chachamim. He said very nicely, he said, this message that shtika is so important and so necessary and such an important thing for the guf, for the body, for your life itself, is a message that he didn't learn from Musa Shmuz, from the Chachamim. They weren't darshaning on this subject all the time. He learned it from their example. He grew up among the Chachamim, and he saw how they lived this in their conduct and their behavior. Not that he heard it from a shmuz. It wasn't the topic of a Vaad that the Chachamim gave. The shtika is so important. He learned it just from watching the Chachamim, how they acted, how they conducted themselves. Now, if we want to find a makar for this in the Chumash, there's a makar in the parsha that we learned yesterday, Parshas Vayechi. But before we get to that, in order to set the table, so to speak, we have to go back a few parshas, not so long ago, to Parshas Vayishlach. In Parshas Vayishlach, it tells the tragic story of what happened to Dinah ben Bas Yaakov, as she was violated by Shechem ben Chamor. Terrible tragedy that took place. And the Torah describes how Shimon and Levi, in their righteous indignation, came into Shechem and massacred the entire male population of the city. All males were slaughtered by Shimon and Levi. And they came back, and Yaakov Avinu heard about it. Yomer Yaakov el Shimon vel Levi. So Yaakov Avinu's response to Shimon and Levi, his two sons, who had committed this massacre, he said to them, Acharta mosi, you dirted me. Lahavisheni biyoshvei haaretz, you made me foul-smelling among the inhabitants of the land. Beknani, amongst the Canaanim, Vuprizi, and the Prizim, Vani, and me, Mesei Mispar. My family is small. How compared to these other nations we're trying to drop in the bucket? V'nesvu alai, and they'll band together against me. V'hikuni, and they'll smite me. V'nishmarati ani uvesi, and I and my family is going to be destroyed. Vayomru, and Shimon and Levi answered their father, Hakazona yases achosenu? Is this the way they should treat a Bas Yaakov? To violate her in this way? Now, what does Yaakov Avinu respond? Torah doesn't say. The conversation is cut off there. Well, Yaakov Avinu wasn't bested by his sons. They didn't have the last word. Why does the Torah leave out what Yaakov Avinu responded? The next pasuk is V'yomer Elokim el Yaakov. But what about the conversation between Yaakov, Shimon, and Levi? It just ends with what Shimon and Levi said. It doesn't say what Yaakov said. If we're getting the details of the conversation, why doesn't the Torah include Yaakov's response to Shimon and Levi? So I heard recently, someone told me over B'Shem, Mordechai Giftis Etzal, the Rosh Hashiva tells, says the Torah doesn't cut off the conversation. The Torah isn't leaving out Yaakov's response. The Torah included Yaakov's response. Only Yaakov's response didn't come in Parshas Vayishlach. And it didn't come in Parshas Vayeshev. And it didn't come in Parshas Vayigash. But Yaakov responded to Shimon and Levi. He responded in Parshas Vayechi. Shimon v'Levi acham klei chomes v'choreisehem. B'sodam al tavo nafshi v'koholam al techad kvodi ki ba'apam hargo ish v'ritzonim ikushor. Orur opam, cursed is their anger. Ki oz, it's very strong B'ezras Hashem. Ki kashasa, it's very strong. Achal came b'Yakov, I'm going to divide them among the Yidden. Va'afitzem b'Yisrael, I'm going to spread them around among Klal Yisrael. Yaakov Avinu responded. He was not pleased with the way Shimon and Levi conducted themselves. But the response didn't come immediately. It didn't come right away in Parshas Vayeshev, or Vayishlach, or Vayigash, but in Parshas Vayeshev. Many, many years later, his response came. The message of Chazal that shtika is so important is in general in response to situations where we sometimes feel we have to respond right away. But it's especially important to the Bnei Bias. There it's even more critically important, as we see from the example of Yaakov Avinu. Now I've mentioned before at some of the Vaadim that Baruch Hashem, I was zocha to have a close kesher with the Boston Rebbe, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Bracha, Reb Levi Yitzchak from Boston. And I was once giving a talk on parenting, and I asked him if he had any recollections growing up as a small child of how his father, the first Boston Rebbe, David, dealt with him. So he shared with me one recollection that he had that to me was priceless. He said as a young boy growing up in Boston, he said there were some times that he may have misbehaved. He didn't remember the specifics, but as a young boy, he wasn't always perfect. He was a normal kid growing up in Boston at the time. And he remembered if he ever did anything that was considered a misbehavior at home, his father, the first Boston Rebbe, had always had the same response. He'd come over to him and to reprimand him, and he'd say to him, Zibin Azager in the free. 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Oh, and the young Reb Levi Yitzchak was petrified. Oh, what's going to be tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock? Oh, I'm going to get it. And he was petrified. The next morning, 7 o'clock came, and 7 o'clock went. Nothing ever happened. Oh, he thought, he missed the bullet, as they say. But next time that happened, he was terrified again. But nothing ever happened. When he was a younger man, after he got married, he asked his father, Tati, when I was growing up and I did something you were upset about, you used to reprimand me and you'd say, Zibin Azager in the free! And I was terrified. But the next morning, nothing ever happened. 7 o'clock came and went. Nothing. What was that all about? So he shared with me what his father told him. He said, I'll tell you, if you did something that bothered me, upset me, or annoyed me, or that I was bothered by, and I got a little angry, so I thought to myself, if I'm going to give you a punishment now, it may be more than you deserve for what you did. But because I'm angry and I'm upset, I'm going to punish you more isn't fair, isn't right. So I said to you, Zibin Azager in the free. Tomorrow morning at 7, that's when we're going to deal with this misbehavior of yours. And that would give me a chance to cool down, think it over more rationally, and decide what you deserved based on what you did. And the next morning at 7 o'clock, either I forgot about what you did, or if I remembered, I realized it wasn't so terrible in the first place, and it didn't deserve any punishment. So that's why nothing ever happened. But my immediate response was, I'm not going to deal with this now, because I'm a little hot under the collar, I'm a little heated up, and now's not the right time for me to be dispensing punishments if I'm already upset, because I could end up giving you a punishment you don't deserve. So that's how the first Boston Rebbe, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Bracha, dealt with this parsha of shtika. Now it's important for B'nai Bias. It's certainly important between parents and children. but it's even more important, Rabbosai, between husbands and wives. So, I have one more story that I wanted to share with you that illustrates that. It's a famous story that many of you may have heard, but even if there's one of you that didn't, it's kedai to chazal the story, just for the sake of the one who didn't hear it. The story told about Reb Meir Wikler, who I heard actually from one of his War Einiklach told me this story. So if there's different versions, whatever version you heard, I'm giving you the accurate version. It seems he was in possession of a very, very rare set of tefillin that were written by the same sofer that wrote the tefillin for the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And there's a priceless pair of tefillin that he had in his possession. Now, he was not a rich man, and whatever money came in from Pidyonis, that people came for brachas, he gave out to tzedakah, and he never had any money in the house, and he was very much impoverished. And many times his Rebbetzin would come over to him and say, Matala, maybe sell the tefillin, at least we'll have what to feed the children, because it's so hard to feed them. We don't have any money in the house. And no, he could never sell the tefillin. There's the same tefillin written. The parshas were written by the same sofer that had written the tefillin of the Baal Shem Tov. There's no way he could part with these tefillin. Okay. There was a particular year that it was very, very difficult to get the Daled Minim for Sukkot. And for love of money, you couldn't get a lulav and esrog in Horny Steipel. For whatever reason, it was not to be gotten. And there was no Eitzah. And it was getting close to Sukkot. And Ramatullah was desperate to be able to be kind of the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. No one had. He's sitting in his study learning. He's looking out the window, and he sees a man walking by carrying a lulav and esrog. Couldn't believe it. He jumped up. He ran outside. He said, Shalom Aleichem, Reb Yid. Who are you? Where are you coming? Well, it turns out he was a businessman. He was just traveling through the town on his way home for Yontif. He said, would it be possible maybe you would stay with us for Yontif? We'd put you up. You could stay the whole week of Sukkot in our house. We'd love to have you. Because, we don't have a lulav and esrog in town. And I see you have a lulav and esrog. Please be our guest. He said, no, I appreciate the invitation. Very kind of you. It's what my family's expecting me. I'm going home for Yontif. Okay, look, if you can't stay in Honey Steipel, could I by any chance purchase the lulav esrog from you? He says, no, it's very hard to get this year. I spent a lot of money on it. You realize he said, I do realize we don't have any in the whole town. He said, look, I couldn't sell it to you because it cost a lot of money, I spent a lot of money, and I want to have a lulav esrog myself. So the Rebbe said to him, listen, tell me how much you paid for it, whatever it is, I'll pay you. We don't have any in the whole town. And I'm desperate to be Mekayim the mitzvah. Maybe in the town where you're going to, someone else will have a lulav esrog, you can borrow theirs. And I said, well, okay. And he mentioned the price. He said, I know it's a lot of money, but I can't sell it to you for less than I paid for it. I said, no problem. I'll get the money for you. Wait here. The Matla ran back home, took the tefillin, went to sell them. Sold the tefillin. With the money he got from this purchase of the sale of his tefillin, he was able to buy the lulav and esrog. The man agreed to sell the lulav and esrog. You saw how desperate Reb Meir was for the lulav and esrog, and he sold it to him for the price he paid, which was just about the price of that he sold it to him for. Now Reb Meir was thrilled, and he came back to his farm steed. He was sitting down. He had the esrog in front of him, just staring at it. He was so excited. Now he could be Mekayim the mitzvah lulav and esrog. And he's just sitting there in his farm steed, staring at the esrog. And the Rebbetzin comes in. And she says, Reb Meir, where did you get an esrog? Where did you get an esrog? There's no esrog in there. You can't get for love of money anywhere. How did you get an esrog? So I saw a man walking by, and he was traveling through town, and he had a lulav of an esrog, and he sold it to me. She said, you must have paid a lot of money. He said, I did, but it's worth it for the mitzvah lulav of an esrog. She said, where did you get that money? We don't have any money. He said, well, I sold the tefillin. You sold the tefillin? The children are starving, you wouldn't sell the tefillin. And for an esrog, you sold the tefillin? She was so enraged. She ran over. She grabbed the esrog off the table, and she threw it across the room. Of course, you can imagine what happened. The pitum got knocked off. The matal walks over, picks up the esrog, and he sees the pitum is knocked off. The esrog is puzzled. Can't use it. The Rebbe was horrified. She lost herself. She lost control. She realized what she had done, and she was mortified. What is her husband going to say to her now after what she had done? He spent the priceless heirloom tefillin for the esrog, and now she ruined the esrog. The pitum is knocked off. Matla sat down at his chair, didn't say a word. After a long pause, he looked up and he addressed in his mind the Satan, the Zeh Lashono. He said, the heirloom tefillin, I don't have any more. The esrog, Dalad Mina, I don't have any more. You're not going to take away my shalom bias. That was his response. The lesson from the esrog, the same lesson as the stove story. When you think in your righteous indignation that an immediate response is called for, remember that isn't always so. Sometimes what's called for is what Chazal said, silence, shtika, not saying anything. That's sometimes the best response. And as the Rosh Hashiv, as the Mashgiach, now he's a Mashgiach, that time he's a Kohen Yaman, was so grateful that the phones weren't working, so he didn't make a fool out of himself and a Chilul Hashem by firing the moving man. And Min HaShamayim, they enabled him to be shosek, to be quiet. And Reb Matula, Honi Stipler, who was able to be misgaber on himself and not say anything to his wife and just addressed the Satan privately, is the way we should all conduct ourselves when we're put in those tense situations where we think our children or our spouse requires an immediate response to something they did or said, and sometimes the best response to what they did or said is shtika. Let me just remind you all that the next Vaad will be B'ezras Hashem in 4 weeks, which comes out to the Sunday after Parshas Shira, and it comes out in English January 20th. Hope I'll see you all back then at B'ezras Hashem. Have a good day.